horror movies in Hollywood, I can tell you firsthand that a key barometer for a horror film getting made at the studio level is its relevancy. Every monster that has ever terrified you on screen is a reflection of a real-world fear. From the atomic anxieties of the 1950s to the technological paranoia we feel today, horror movies have always been a dark mirror, showing society's deepest anxieties right back at us. So today, we're going on a trip through the decades of American horror to decode what these films reveal about our hidden fears and what the horror of 2025 tells us about the world right now. It all starts in the aftermath of World War II. The 1950s were defined by a brand new kind of terror, the Cold War. This period was soaked in paranoia, a fear of nuclear annihilation and the creeping dread of an unseen enemy. Early horror gave us primal monsters like vampires and werewolves, but the 50s fused horror with science fiction to create a new beast born of atomic anxiety.
It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion.
Suddenly, the monster wasn't just a myth. It was an extraterrestrial invader or a radioactive mutant. A film like The Thing from Another World is a perfect snapshot of this fear. The alien creature, found frozen in the Arctic, wasn't just a monster to be fought. It was a metaphor for communist infiltration, an insidious other that could look just like us. These films mirrored anxieties about the unknown consequences of science and the very real threat of nuclear war. The horror wasn't just on screen, it was in daily news headlines and the duck and cover drills at schools. The monsters from outer space were just giving a face to the faceless terror of the atomic bomb. But what happens when the monster isn't from outer space but from right next door, or even from inside our own minds? The 1960s were a decade of profound social upheaval. The civil rights movement, political assassinations, and deep cultural fractures changed the American landscape forever, and horror adapted. The master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock, shattered audience expectations with the 1960s Psycho. Here, the terror wasn't a creature, but a seemingly normal man whose mind was the source of the horror. The monster was now officially human. Then in 1968, George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead unleashed a new kind of monster, the modern zombie. These slow, shambling ghouls weren't just flesh eaters. They were a powerful metaphor for a society consuming itself. The film's bleak, nihilistic tone reflected a nation grappling with the chaos of the Vietnam War. Most significantly, the film's hero, Ben, was a black man. His intelligence stood in stark contrast to the panicked white characters around him. But in the film's gut-punch ending, Ben, the sole survivor, is mistaken for a zombie by a posse of white men and shot dead.
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes.
In an era of intense racial injustice, that ending was no accident. It was a searing commentary on the tensions tearing America apart. If the 60s showed a society starting to fray, the 1970s showed it in full-on collapse. The ongoing trauma of Vietnam, the Watergate scandal, a surge in crime created an atmosphere of pure chaos and distrust. American horror responded by becoming more brutal, more realistic, and more terrifyingly random. This decade gave birth to the slasher. And it's no coincidence. News headlines were filled with stories of real-life serial killers like Ted Bundy and the Son of Sam, men who looked like your neighbor but committed monstrous acts. Horror translated this new, terrifying reality to the screen. Films like Halloween and Friday the 13th brought that fear into the one place that was supposed to be safe, the suburbs. The killer was no longer a supernatural entity, but a masked, motiveless force of nature like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, embodying the chilling idea that the real boogeyman could be living right down the street. At the same time, the home itself became a battleground. Anxieties around shifting gender roles and the rise of second-wave feminism exploded on the screen. In The Exorcist, a young girl's demonic possession challenges science, patriarchy, and religion. And in Carrie, a tormented teenager pushed to the brink by her cruel peers, and religious fanaticism unleashed her telekinetic rage. These films showed that the greatest horrors could erupt from within the family, the body, and the soul, reflecting a society deeply uncertain of its own moral compass. Just as the Cold War defined the fears of the 1950s, the attacks of September 11, 2001 reshaped the anxieties of a new millennium. A collective trauma settled over the nation, giving rise to new fears of terrorism, surveillance, and the violation of our safest spaces. This era gave birth to the torture subgenre, most famously with the Saw franchise. Released in 2004, just months after the Abu Ghraib prison photos were made public, Saw tapped directly into the moral compromises of the war on terror. The film confronted audiences with graphic depictions of bodily violation and twisted moral games, reflecting a socio-political fear of torture that was dominating the headlines. This anxiety was also captured in the rise of found footage genre. Paranormal Activity turned a simple suburban house into the site of an unrelenting dread, where the enemy was an unseen force and the camera was a silent witness. The fear came from feeling vulnerable and losing all privacy in your own home, mirroring a societal anxiety about surveillance and threats you couldn't see. Films like The Stranger took this fear to an even more brutal conclusion. When the captive homeowners ask their masked assailants why they're doing this, the chilling reply is,
"Why are you doing this to us?" "Because you were home."
This wasn't about politics or religion. It was about the terrifying randomness of violence invading the sanctuary of your life, a direct reflection of a post-9/11 world where safety felt like an illusion. In the 2010s and early 2020s, horror evolved once again. As society became more polarized and conversations around systemic issues grew louder, a new wave of intelligent horror emerged, blending terrifying scares with a sharp social critique. These films didn't just want to scare you, they wanted to make you think. No one has defined this movement more than Jordan Peele. His 2017 masterpiece, Get Out, used the frame of a horror film to deliver a blistering commentary on systemic racism and the quiet hypocrisy of white liberals. Suddenly, the monster wasn't a ghost or a killer, it was a set of deeply ingrained societal prejudices. This era also saw horror dive deep into our internal landscapes. Films like Hereditary and Midsommar explored inherited family trauma, grief, and mental anguish in visceral, unforgettable ways. The horror became the emotional baggage we carry, and when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the genre responded almost immediately. The 2020 film Host, shot entirely over a Zoom call, perfectly captured the anxieties of forced isolation, our fragile reliance on technology, and the fear of a deadly, unseen contagion. So that brings us to now. If horror is a time capsule, what do the films of 2025 tell us about our current fears? Well, The Mirror is reflecting a society grappling with instability, technological anxiety, and moral uncertainty. One of the most dominant themes is social and psychological decay. Films like Ryan Coogler's Sinners and Zach Cregger's Weapons are tapping into this vein, mixing horror with sharp social critique. They explore how trauma and societal pressure can turn people against each other, reflecting our anxieties about living in a fractured, polarized world. The long shadow of the pandemic also continues to loom. The sequel, 28 years later, directly taps into our fears of societal breakdown and contagion, reminding us just how fragile civilization is. Meanwhile, our relationship with technology has become a potent source of terror. Whether it's the movie Companion or the killer AI in Megan, these reflect our anxieties about surveillance, public judgment, and the tools we built turning against us. It's the modern-day version of science gone wrong, updated for the age of the algorithm. We're living in an age of existential dread where the real monsters are often reality itself: climate crisis, social division, and digital loneliness. From radioactive monsters to psychological demons, the evolution of American horror is the evolution of American fear. The genre has always been a place where we can process our deepest anxieties and give a face to the formless dread that permeates a generation. The monsters change because our fears change. Horror doesn't just reflect the times, it helps us understand them by exaggerating our fears until they become manageable. Horror films are finally being taken seriously because they're processing our fractured world in a way few other genres can. So the next time you watch a horror movie, don't just ask yourself what you're afraid of on screen. Ask yourself what it says about what we're all afraid of right now. What do you think will be the next monster to crawl out of our collective nightmare? I'd love to know, so let me know in the comments. And once again, I'm Brian. This is Plot Luck. And if you've ever loved a story, felt let down by one, or dreamed of telling your own, pull up a chair, hit subscribe, and let's stir the plot together. That's a wrap.